Thank you all for coming today. We're the new staff for the new president of Panama, and we'd like to present our plan to improve this country over the next 5 years.
Just over 2 weeks ago, each of you standing in front of me had the chance to meet with guides and business professionals during an immersion experience in Panama. During this time, you were given the opportunity to learn about Panama's history, their economy, areas in need of improvement, and the marvel that started it all, the canal. While we know that Panama's economy today is extremely balanced, with no one sector occupying more than 7% of GDP, this has not always been the case. Therefore, one cannot fully understand Panama and its rise to success without first understanding the canal and the importance it has had for our country. The Panama Canal dates back to a time before Panama itself. In 1882, the French gained the rights from the Colombian government to create a passage that would drastically improve trade between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. Unfortunately for them, however, they were plagued with issues from the start and never saw the project to completion. Seeking a way out, and knowing that the U.S. was the only country at the time likely capable of completing the task, the French made their proposal, and in 1902 struck an agreement for the transfer of the canal zone and its assets to the United States. The only problem was that the Colombian government had the final say, and they were wary of their neighbors to the north. Eager to not let their efforts be stopped, the U.S. backed a Panamanian bid for independence, strategically stationed a battleship to prevent the movement of the Colombian army, and helped Panama to their independence in 1903. In 1904, a treaty similar to the one previously proposed to Colombia was ratified, and 10 years later, in 1914, the canal saw its first voyage. Despite its importance to global trade from day one, the Panama Canal has not always been a significant contributor to Panama's economy. As you can see in the first section of the graph, for the first 65 years of the canal's existence, Panama received only indirect economic benefits, and therefore saw little impact to GDP. Beginning in 1979, however, this all began to change, as Panama began to reap the benefits of our national trademark as a result of the Torrijos-Carter Treaty. Under the terms of the treaty, which was signed 2 years prior, a gradual transfer of canal ownership began, and an increasing number of canal zone jobs began to be filled by Panamanians. The treaty also provided Panama with increased economic benefits, including a fixed annuity of $10 million, 30 cents per time per vessel passing through, and $10 million annually for services being provided to the canal zone, all of which resulted in a steadily increasing GDP. When 2000 rolled around, Panama's GDP exploded and never looked back. While there is no doubt in my mind that this expansion resulted in part from the newfound ownership of the canal, it should be noted that our economy has become so much more. The canal may have been what put us on the map initially, but it is no longer all that we have to offer. At the same time, I ask that you not be fooled by the graph. Although Panama has performed exceptionally over the past decade and a half, this chart is not representative of the problems that persist within our country. If improvements are not made, especially on the grounds of poverty, these days of stellar performance could very well come to an end.
To enhance the well-being of all Panamanian people, the issue of poverty needs to be addressed. Before we dive into why, let's take a closer look into what poverty actually looks like in Panama. It is important to note, Panama has made significant progress in reducing poverty in recent years. Between 2008 and 2014, a period including the global financial crisis, Panama managed to reduce poverty from 26.2% to 18.7%, and extreme poverty from 14.5% to 10.2%. This means that of a population of about 3.9 million people, an additional 168,000 Panamanians overcame extreme poverty, while close to 300,000 got out of poverty during that period. Despite the gains on poverty reduction, sharp regional disparities remain. Poverty prevails in rural areas mainly inhabited by indigenous people. Currently, Panama is experiencing a 23% poverty rate in rural areas. It is about 27%. Moreover, in indigenous territories, known as comarcas, poverty is above 70% and extreme poverty is above 40%. Lack of services, particularly access to water and sanitation and health, continues to be a constraint in the comarcas. We're going to address three major issues. First, why should we care? Second, why not focus on something else? And three, what are the potential long-term solutions? So first, why should we care? No one is going to argue that persistent poverty of a substantial portion of the population can dampen the prospects for economic growth. Poverty creates a cycle of unemployment, lack of education, and leads to higher incarceration costs, all of which have an effect on the stability and success of a country's economy. Along with that, poverty, and more specifically rural poverty, have contributed to rapid population growth and migration to urban areas. In fact, much urban poverty is created by the rural poor's effort to get out of poverty by moving into the cities. Bottom line, rural poverty is expensive and inefficient for a country. Solving this poverty issue would transform Panama from a developing country into a first world international power. Second, why not focus on something else? The causes of poverty are complex and multidimensional. They involve, among other things, culture, climate, gender, markets, and public policy. Likewise, the poor are quite diverse in both the problems they face and the possible solution to these problems. Focusing on one specific aspect of economy is too narrow-minded for the positive change we wish to create in Panamanian lives. We want to take a more holistic approach and address a larger, multidimensional issue through various aspects of the economy. And finally, what are the potential solutions? Bottom line, you cannot bring people out of poverty without economic growth. To focus on growing the economy, we will address the microeconomic part of the issue through infrastructure, tourism, and education, and also the macro side of the issue through the greater economic benefits and foreign direct investment. However, for this to be a sustainable solution, the Panamanians need to be empowered. Change needs to come from within without the influence from larger countries such as the United States.
With that being said, we see opportunities to improve not only the economy section of infrastructure, but also to improve poverty. We will continue to address traffic congestion by working with the SPM by adding 2 metro lines to the current master plan. The current metro plan was developed by the SPM in the last government and is planned to have a total of 4 metro lines by the year 2035. Line 1, which is the red line, has 3-car trains that can hold up to 600 people. However, the platforms are built to hold 6-car trains, so we see obvious room for growth. We think building 2 more metro lines will be the best option because it is cheaper and more efficient. It is approximately $2 to purchase a metro card, and it is much cheaper as opposed to taking a taxi or for those who can't afford to buy a car. It is also more efficient than a bus. It runs every 2 to 4 minutes during the day and every 8 minutes at night, so it is much faster and, again, more efficient. We will work with the community to reach out to determine where it is best to add the additional 2 lines. We believe by adding 2 more lines to the master plan, it will create jobs in construction. Once again, it is the fastest, cheapest, and most efficient option, and we want our people to get around our city easy and continue to get to their jobs and where they need to be.
Currently, only 34% of roads are paved. We will continue to improve roads to make coming to and from Panama City more accessible. We also want to invest in better urban planning. As we all know, 2 weeks ago, Horatio informed us that we need to do a better job on this.
We also want to address the unskilled workforce and education. As you can see, the unemployment rate was going down for a couple of years, but now it is starting to increase, and we want to address that before it becomes a bigger issue than it is. We will do this by working with the Ministry of Education to improve schools. As you guys remember, there is a lack of talent in Panama, but it is hard to hire foreigners. If we can't educate our people, we want to change that. We can give them jobs to make them ideal candidates, which can help them move out of poverty. As we learned, public schools in Panama are poor, but people are struggling to make ends meet. It costs approximately $10,000 to send a student to private school, which for many families in poverty, that is not attainable. We want to break this cycle. Past governments have banned teaching English in schools, but the previous government of Varela have implemented teaching English back in schools, and we will continue this throughout our future. We will also make a plan to incentivize teachers. For instance, they can go to America to learn English and then come back to Panama and teach their students what they learned abroad and also their English skills. We will work with companies in Panama to create training programs, such as Copa Airlines and Caterpillar had mentioned. This will give people who aren't ready for college a chance to learn a skill set and give them a job. We hope that these plans will help level the playing field and close the gap between the haves and the have-not. We do realize that education policy is difficult to do in 5 years, but if we can invest in our students now, we are investing in our future.
The tourism and travel industry is a key factor in Panama's economy, with attractions such as the Panama Canal, beaches, hiking in Boquete, and unique indigenous routes. We can see that in 2015, 17.5% of Panama's GDP was travel and tourism. We want to promote this more by promoting agritourism and ecotourism to give a better dispersion of wealth. We also want more jobs are expected from travel and tourism to increase to 370,000, and they were originally 305,000 in 2014. We want to market and advertise all Panama has to offer.
So the government projects alone are not enough. They must be coupled with proper market incentivizing policy to ensure financial success for all Panamanians. These policies must ensure access to personal loans and business loans for small businesses, which have the most growth potential, allowing for the most job growth in Panama. These policies must not do anything to change our high levels of foreign direct investment. We have to lower our barriers to entry to make sure the price of goods stay low. We have to emphasize these sectors that have high growth potential and that are underutilized currently. And again, keep the price of goods low, as these affect people with lower incomes the most. If we allow people that have less income to have more disposable income, they will be able to spend on other things, and they will be propelled into the middle class. The main objective of all these policies is to create long-term, high-wealth jobs for Panamanians.
Speaking of keeping prices low, another problem that Panama needs to address in order to improve the lives of its citizens is the agricultural protectionism that Horatio made you aware of in your meeting 2 weeks ago. Although improvements have been made as a result of the recent U.S.-Panama Free Trade Agreement, and tariffs have been removed from products such as soybeans and wheat, some tariffs still remain to be phased out. Besides the fact that the tariff is hindering relations with the U.S., the supplier of 60% of Panama's imported food products, the initial reason for the tariff is illogical as well. At one point in time, these tariffs were drawn up in order to protect Panamanian farmers and reduce reliance on foreign food sources, in case there was ever a situation that prevented Panama from acquiring that food. However, in today's increasingly globalized world, this seems highly unlikely. Furthermore, the chart of Panama's food exports hardly appears to show the sustainable food sources that would be necessary for reducing foreign reliance, considering bananas are at the top of our list. This, coupled with the record $666 million in agricultural products imported from the U.S. during the 2014 fiscal year, just goes to show that these tariffs are not preventing imports, but only making them more expensive. Two of the key imports that remain partially restricted are yellow corn and paddy rice, which are duty-free only up to a certain quota. Considering that U.S. bulk exports increased 6.8% in 2015, with yellow corn accounting for $84 million worth, it doesn't make sense to phase these tariffs out slowly. As I mentioned previously, these tariffs are not protecting our farmers, just hurting our people by causing higher food prices. On the map to the left, this idea is made even clearer. The areas in green indicate the land used for corn production in the U.S., while the cutout of South Carolina shows the approximate size of Panama, with only 7.3% of that land actually being arable. As a result, we see that it is virtually impossible for Panama to compete with the U.S. agriculturally. Therefore, instead of prolonging the process, I would like to see these remaining tariffs removed in the next 18 months, in an effort to remove any remaining inefficiencies that might be negatively impacting the lives of the Panamanian people.
In terms of increasing the access to capital for people and businesses, it's a very interesting situation we have here in Panama because we have no central bank like the U.S. Federal Reserve or Government Deposit Insurance Corporation, so a lot of options are more difficult for increasing internal investment. We can't use a strategy many European countries use like quantitative easing. We can't mess with the interest rates as much as that is prohibited under Panamanian law, and printing a lot of money in a short period is just out of the question because we can't do that since we don't have a central bank. So Panamanian banks, what they respond best to is policies that incentivize them to move in the direction that we want to within the market. So, according to Panamanian banking expert Paul Smith, one of the best available options is to lower the risk of investments by creating a new government insurance branch. This branch will be run under the bank superintendency. The superintendent of banks will become the superintendent of banks and insurance. We will create a voluntary program that will insure each bank account up to 250,000 US dollars per bank per customer. What this will do is it will increase consumer confidence in the financial sector, leading to more investments in banks. It will lower banks' risk profiles, allowing them to allocate more of their capital to higher growth loans like small businesses, which are typically a bit higher risk, but with the lower risk profile, the difference between that and a lower risk loan is about the same. It'll allow smaller banks with higher growth potential to be more competitive with these larger banks, as there will be less risk of failure. The question is, how are we going to implement that? It seems pretty clear that all Panamanian banks think it would be a good idea, but one of the issues is, how is it to go about implementation? So this is our current structure for rates listed under how many basis points a bank would pay. Most Panamanian banks fall under Capital Group 1 or 2, well capitalized or adequately capitalized, due to the conservative nature of Panamanian banks. So most of these banks will pay a smaller basis point rate for the first 5 years. Now, obviously, we won't have control after the next 5 years, but these are our suggestions for after the 5-year pay-in goes into the insurance, what the rates should be. We hope the next government will see the success of our program and keep the rates at these levels. Another thing that we think can definitely be changed is how the Panama Canal has been used. It's been used in the past as just a way to generate revenue by the fares coming through. But our plan is to transform it into a business asset for all businesses in Panama. Currently, there's no major coastal port on the Pacific side of Panama outside of the canal, meaning that you will have to pass into the canal if you want to dump goods on the Pacific side of Panama, or if you're coming from the Pacific side and you want to dock at a port, you'll have to pass through the canal, incurring costs. Something we're going to do is a new program. We're going to offer free fares for any goods manufactured that are bound out of Panama. We're going to offer free fares for any empty container that's bound to pick up Panamanian goods to depart out of Panama. And we're going to offer free fares for any goods that are raw goods that are bound to be manufactured in Panama and then exported. Our estimates predict that this will cause a minimum 4% growth to the manufacturing sector, and the jobs will come along with it. So our conclusion, all of our new projects will be undertaken by issuing of Panamanian investment-grade government bonds, which we have a very high credit rating. It's a BBB investment grade rating.
At the end of the day, poverty plays a substantial role in the development of not only a country's economy, but also the development of the people. An investment in people through different facets of the economy like infrastructure, education, and access to credit and loans is the best type of investment you can make. Bottom line, poverty is expensive for a country. It lowers long-term competitiveness, weakens communities and the middle class, and is harmful for a developing society. By implementing our short-term plan, Panama can expect to have long-term benefits in the way of decreased levels of poverty, higher productivity and FDI levels, and general wealth and prosperity. With these implementations, we are going to improve the well-being of the Panamanian people. After all, an investment in people always yields the highest returns.